Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. I'm very happy and excited to be here. Colleagues know that I have been planning this session and wanting to do this session for already several months by now. So thanks to everyone for making it happen. Thanks to our speakers for being here today. And thanks for the audience for taking an interest in this session. And today's session is really about integrating electrolysers in the power markets and how this can really contribute to true sector integration, which we felt there's a lot of discussions about hydrogen. There's a lot of discussion about in the olden days sector coupling, if those who remember those discussions. But yet I felt that lately this sector integration approach of hydrogen has been less discussed. So we wanted to bring back this full potential of hydrogen and electricity system integration in order to really bring back the long-term vision and a bit go back to the roots why hydrogen is so important for the energy transition. And I would like to recall where we are coming from. And next month is going to mark the 5th anniversary of our hydrogen strategy, of our 2020 hydrogen strategy. And just to go back a bit in time, why at that time we said that hydrogen is going to be a very important energy carrier for the future. And it all starts with climate neutrality, Europe's strong commitment to climate neutrality, which means that you really have to walk the last mile in decarbonization. And this, of course, will mean a lot more electricity, so a lot more electricity in the system. There is a wide consensus across many, if not all studies that I've seen, that electricity will more than double, both in terms of shares as in terms of amounts. But electricity alone is unlikely to be able to do the trick. So we will need molecules, and these molecules need to be decarbonized in order to really achieve climate neutrality and to provide the decarbonization solutions for also those sectors where emissions are hard to abate and where electrification is just a great challenge. And this is where hydrogen really comes in to provide that solution for the last mile. But that's not the only benefit, of course, of hydrogen, because if we go back again to the electricity system, electrification is going to be so important also because of the spectacular drop of costs in renewable energy technologies, in renewable electricity technologies, which are, of course, a great benefit for electrification, but they're also a great benefit for hydrogen and making hydrogen competitive and the decarbonized molecule for the future. And here, of course, this is especially about electrolytic hydrogen. So nothing to take away from the importance of also other forms of low carbon and renewable hydrogen. But today, I think when we talk about system integration, we would like to focus more on the electrolytic pathways for decarbonized, so renewable and low carbon hydrogen. And when we look at the electricity system in 2050, we see that, of course, there's lots of renewables in there. And this is, of course, why electrification drives decarbonization. But a lot of these renewables are likely to come from variable sources like wind and sun. So the system needs to deal with this variability, and we will need increasing amounts of flexibility. So hydrogen, again, comes in here because it can provide demand response and really absorb when a lot of renewable electricity is in the grid. At the same time, and I think by now everybody knows this beautiful German word of Dunkelflaute, there will be also moments in time where the sun will not shine for longer periods of time or not provide as much electricity as it does in other moments, and when there will be also the wind just standing stiller than usual. And then we will need longer amounts of time to bridge those low production periods. And here we are not talking only of hours, because of course hours will happen as well, but it might be also even weeks. And there you need a longer term or medium term solution, energy that you can store. And then again, hydrogen comes into the picture, because that's the moment when hydrogen can be stored in large scale, and we are going to hear more about that, and can give back services to the electricity system. So this is why hydrogen, in our view, is so important for system integration. And today, really, our objective is to despite all the difficulties that we hear lately about the ramping up of the sector, what we wanted to do today is really to bring back this long-term vision, to recall why we are all doing this, why this is going to be very, very important and still important today, and to be maybe hopefully giving a bit back of hope to the sector, to really focus again on the long-term vision and to see focus on the hydrogen potential for system integration, and then to explore today, okay, how can we make this happen? So first of all, is this vision still a shared vision? And I hope very much so, but of course we want to hear from all of you. And also, if it's still a shared vision, how can we make it happen? Which are the barriers that we should be removing? And how to really get to 2050 in a cost-efficient and integrated manner. And in order to further set the scene, I will immediately pass on the word to our keynote speaker, Dr. Fabian Neumann, who's a postdoctoral researcher at the Technische Universität Berlin. I had to say it in German. He is going to present us his research, which is focusing on planning resilient energy infrastructures to accelerate the transition to a climate-neutral energy system. And he will provide us with some solid scientific background based on modeling and figures applied in his and his team's research on hydrogen production, electrolysers, impact on the electricity market and infrastructure. Fabian, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you also from my side for the kind invitation and the opportunities to speak here. So as an academic, I was asked to give a more kind of research perspective or a scientific quantitative analysis on integrating electrolysers in Europe's future electricity system. And our research generally is concerned with finding what pathways are cost-effective to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, mostly focused on Europe, but we've also done research on other continents. And you can think of our research as being concerned with the evaluation of grid expansion plans like the TYNDP, a network development plan, thinking about hydrogen strategies, import strategies, and also carbon management strategies. So all things that you see coming up at national and as well as the European level. And the open source Pipes of Europe that we develop at the Institute is an optimization model, a computer model that tries to co-optimize the different types of infrastructure that we need to get to climate neutrality from placing and operating the different generation, storage, conversion, and transmission infrastructures. So it models across all the sectors, including power, heat, transport, industry, as well as, and they are not unimportant feedstock demands for making plastics and fertilizers. And you can see from the images, and I will get to that later, that these models, they have regional resolution to represent resource diversity and transport bottlenecks, as well as temporal resolution, so that we can see how the system likes to manage renewable variability with flexible demands, as well as backup capacities and other alternatives. So think of it as somewhat a free-spirited analysis that abstracts from many of the policies that are currently in place, looks at kind of cost-effective outcomes, and looks at kind of what-if scenarios for 2050 to distill what role electrolysers could play. So, but before we get really started, should maybe bring up this chart and look more generally at what the role of Europe's, or what role of hydrogen in Europe's net zero economy would be, and I will make the point that it depends a lot on what stance we as European nations take on our import strategies of renewable energy, biomass usage, and carbon management strategy. So the top two charts here, so you see here a hydrogen balance of supply on the right side and consumption on the left side. The top two scenarios here are two scenarios I picked out, and we'll follow that closely throughout the next slides, are scenarios with no imports and relatively strict sequestration limits, around 250 megatons per year. That's similar to what you see, for example, in the European carbon management strategy. You can see here large amounts of electrolytic hydrogen production that is mostly produced for supplying the chemical feedstock demands and fuel demands in aviation, shipping, and fuel. So re-electrification of hydrogen here in terms of energy volumes plays a rather secondary role. But as we allow green energy imports and allow more sequestration, the overall volume of hydrogen handled in the system diminishes as the relatively costly e-fuel synthesis is substituted by other either imports or more use of fossil fuels with carbon dioxide removal technologies used elsewhere in the system. But we'll focus here on the two upper scenarios where you have a lot of electrolyzers that need to be matched with variable supply of demand of wind and solar. And that becomes really clear when you look at the temporal balances on the electricity system. On the right-hand side, you can see the balance on a daily average. And the 5 important colors are here, wind for blue, yellow for solar, and then the electrolyzers here is in pink. And in green, you see the heating demand. And what you see from this daily averages here is you can see somewhat a seasonal component of the hydrogen that operates more when solar electricity is abundant and the heat demand is low. So if we look closer at some more challenging periods on the left-hand side in February, and then we see how the electrolyzers runs very flexibly, especially in the periods where you have these Dunkelflauten events, scarcity events, where your heating demand is high and your renewable supply is low, and you already have backup capacities running in the system. So there's one important caveat with this graphic. It's a scenario with relatively low capex of electrolyzers that allow the electrolyzers to run flexibly. And if we look at a sensitivity analysis here on the sensitivity cost across a range of different scenarios, so that's why there is not one dot, but there are multiple violin charts. As you go from left to right, we increase the electrolyzer costs in the system. And you can see that as we increase the cost from kind of relatively maybe, or we can discuss that later, maybe optimistic electrolyzer costs of 500 euros per kilowatt with 45% capacity factor, as we increase that to more near-term or near-current costs of around 1,500 euros per kilowatt electric, then this capacity factor rises to 60%. So running the electrolyzers when prices are so in that sense, you have less flexibility if your capex is high, but still with the full load hours of around 5,000 terawatt hours, this still constitutes a substantial level of flexibility despite the high capex, and really just underlines the value of the flexible electrolyzer optimization for system integration. So what we see, it's perhaps a more detailed view across the scenarios, that the flexible electrolyzers operation has positive impacts not only on the electricity prices, but also on the hydrogen prices. So on the hydrogen side, by shifting load to low electricity price periods, we can see that this electricity cost component of the domestic hydrogen production is reduced. And on the other hand, so that's case B, on the electricity side, by shifting load of the electrolyzers out of the renewable scarcity events, we kind of avoid use of other alternatives like batteries or backup capacities that need to run, or would otherwise need to run when the electrolyzers were not so flexible. So to illustrate that, I brought these two heat maps of electricity prices at the top and the electrolyzer operation at the bottom. So it's a bit like climate stripes with a temporal resolution. The vertical stripes each represent a day that is further then vertically split into the different hours of the day. And perhaps if you look again at January-February period, you can see how the electrolyzers ramp down during these difficult periods where the prices are high, and then they run when the electricity prices are low throughout the summer periods. So the flexible operation of the electrolyzers, of course, means that we either need to use the hydrogen as flexibly in downstream processes for fertilizer or fuel production, or we need to bring in some intermediate buffering by storing the hydrogen. And that's also something that the model co-optimizes. And what we what the point I have to make is that the equally flexible operation of e-fuel synthesis units, for example, Fischer-Tropsch units, may sometimes be challenging, either for technical reasons, such as ramp limits or minimum part loads, or for economic reasons, just because the fuel unit maybe has very high investment costs and needs to run a certain full load hours, similar to the effect that we've seen previously on the electrolyzer CapEx sensitivity analysis. So here we see the hydrogen storage, again for the month of February, coming in as it fills in the blank between flexible electrolyzer operation in pink and a more stable Fischer-Tropsch or fuel or methanolization synthesis in green. Also, there's still some flexibility, but you can see from the spikiness of the profile that the variability in e-fuel synthesis is much smaller. So then you have the hydrogen storage picking up extra hydrogen. So that's the purple bit, extra hydrogen production, for example, at the beginning of the February, and then filling in some of the blanks in between. The result of that is that the hydrogen storage we see in competition with all the different other long-term storage solutions in the system to rather take an intermediary multi-week storage rather than a seasonal storage where you rather have methanol, oil, or gas storage kind of occupying the long-duration energy storage in this segment. So I thought it would be nice to do also kind of a thought experiment, a little bit for fun and a little bit for underlying the points I previously made. It's a run where I said that the electrolyzers could not run flexibly. It has to run baseload when throughout the year. You can see here both on the electricity side, on the right-hand side, and the hydrogen balance on the left-hand side. The pink now is a flat load that has no flexibility at all. And what happens in this scenario is that you really have a detrimental impact on the power system and the overall system cost that is quite remarkable, because as you forgo this flexibility potential of the electrolyzers, you have other technologies that need to come in. So you can see the light green bits here, for example. These are batteries that were not there in that volume in the previous electricity balances for February. And as well, and that's maybe not so easy to see from the time series balances, but overall you also see much more renewable capacities that need to be deployed, and that has to do with a higher need for economic curtailment rates as you have a really large load in the system that, that has no flexibility. So system cost increases here, you can really see them rising by more than 10%. And however, this cost premium is very characteristic of this scenario where we have high electric European production, and that has to do with the volume of the hydrogen production in the system. So in the chart on the left, again, some violent charts with variances on the imports and the carbon sequestration. We compare here the system cost premium when we go from this flexible electrolyzer operation to the baseload electrolyzer optimization. And you can see that as soon as you bring in some form of or higher levels of sequestration, so that's the orange bits in this chart, or you outsource some of the hydrogen production to regions outside of Europe, the hydrogen does not become less important, but it's no longer really a problem for the European electricity system. You can see that this cost penalty is much reduced. So this flexibility, it also scales with the volume of the electrolyzers in the system. So perhaps as a last slide, I will just extend the scope a little bit, because so far my talk focused a lot on the temporal aspects of electrolyzer integration, but the spatial aspects are equally as important with this in a system where you have much regional diversity. For example, regarding where the best wind and solar resources are, where you have potentials for the underground storage of hydrogen and the sequestration of CO2, as well as where the demand and the potential sources of CO2 in industrial clusters are for carbon capture. So this last slide focuses on some of the regional dynamics in 3 layers, from electricity through hydrogen to carbon dioxide. And in each chart, you can see the networks alongside the supply, that would be the upper half circles, and the consumption, which would be the lower half circles. On the electricity side, what you see that the electrolysers go where there's good renewable potentials that result in low prices, so mostly Spain, Southern Europe more generally, and the North Sea area, which then on the hydrogen side leads to some of the electrolysers being co-located with direct air capture, but also a substantial amount of hydrogen transport to fuel production sites in Central Europe. And the main reason for that is that in these regions, there are industrial clusters that offer cheaper biogenic or some fossil sources of CO2 to make synthetic fuels than direct air capture offers. So that's just the kind of thinking it from the other ingredient to make synthetic fuels next to hydrogen. And then the carbon dioxide side, you see the pipeline infrastructure rather being used for bringing the CO2 to offshore sequestration sites. One key caveat, and that's my last point, is that all of this modeling assumes really dynamic pricing, as well as regionally differentiated pricing that incentivize this placement and operation of the electrolysers in this system. Somewhat closes my initial remark that some reforms of the kind of market designs are necessary to really appropriately coordinate this large new potential demand. And I will leave it at that. 4 take-home messages: that the hydrogen we mainly see for chemicals and fuels. This electrolyzer flexibility is important, especially if you have a lot of it. And you need this dynamic locational pricing to make this grid-friendly electrolyzer placement operation a reality. And all that is, of course, a complicated task that this tight system integration requires a lot of coordination across different areas of infrastructure policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabian. And I think this is the perfect scene setter. I think it was very clear from your presentation that you called it strong sector integration. We've got deep sector integration, but ultimately it has a lot of benefits for the system, for the cost efficiency of the system, and for consumers ultimately. But of course, when we then come down to, there are a few challenges which I've also already highlighted, and of course, when we come down how to make it happen in practice, then of course I think we will face other challenges as well. But I think this is the right moment to turn to the panel, because I think we have just the right people here to point us to some of the challenges and some of the solutions as well, with this vision in mind. So first I will just present the panelists. So we have today Cilla Bartok, who is head of gas and hydrogen retail in EUSEW, the European Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators. Then we have Daniel Freil, who is Chief Policy and Market Officer at Hydrogen Europe. Then we have Javier Barrantes Egaña, who is our senior expert from Red Electrica, representing today ENTSO-E, so the European Network of Electricity System Operators. We have Christian Winks, who is the head of product management of TopSOE, and he will then later on tell you what the company is exactly about. And we have Charlotte Roule, CEO of Storengy, so representing the Hydrogen Storage Association. So I would like to really now come to each of you with one question for a short first statement, and then we will make this afterwards a bit more interactive. And I would like to start with Cilla. So Cilla, the question to you is, and EUSEW has recently published its first hydrogen market report. So what would you want to highlight from this report, and what would be like the key points when it comes to hydrogen and electricity system integration?
I should be careful, yes. I think we are slowly in the good afternoon mood, but I'm very happy to be here and to talk to you. And so what I would like to highlight from the EUSEW report, which has been published last year, and we are working eventually on a couple of other things, intertemporal cost allocation, which is very important for then the development of the hydrogen networks that should come to life next to the integration of electrolysers. So all these topics do connect, and they're a lot more complex. We are working with really complex supply chains. But putting that aside, if I'm looking back on our report, I think from the electrolyzer perspective, we were focusing on a couple of recommendations, and one of which was that there should be focus on the electrolyzers, and we should be eventually ramping it up to reduce the costs. And next to or connected to it, there was another recommendation we were proposing, which was about that we wanted to see system integration. That this is very important, especially for the production of green hydrogen, because the electrolyzers are using electricity, renewables, and so you would need to somehow figure out how you integrate the use cases for hydrogen next to the integration of green hydrogen with the electricity and the hydrogen networks and uses. And so that is a very difficult exercise, as I see. So there are all sorts of tools that the European legislation uses, but I think we have not cracked the egg on the system integration issues. And I think there the research that is done by universities are important, because we have to understand how they are working. There should be flexibility across regions, so you have different elements, spatial compositions, which you need to take into account. Also, when you are locating electrolyzers, not only electricity matters, water matters, pipeline connection matters, and for hydrogen, even if when we talk about, for example, importation, you will need to figure out, also the import infrastructure, which is also super expensive, comes with a couple of challenges. You cannot really transport very easily hydrogen. You may need to look into ammonia first. So those are all challenges, and you have to look at it as a single picture. And then what is very basic recommendation, but also relates then to the topic, we need to do implementation. So we need to have similar definitions across the European Union. That is not the same, for example, for green hydrogen. I think we have some challenges with certification, standardization. I think those are standing there. And then that also applies when we are building up equipment. So the standardization has numerous facets which we would need to solve in order to reduce the cost. Because in order to make the green hydrogen work with electricity, it's not only the higher level policy measures that are important, but it's also important to reduce the cost, to have cost-efficient technologies. And I think we are at the beginning of the road. And I would stop here.
Thank you very much, Cilla. And indeed, I think if we were to kind of list all the aspects of hydrogen that needs to be in place in order to make the energy system integration work. Of course, there's a lot more to it, but we only have 1.5 hours, unfortunately. So, so we plan to really focus on this system integration approach, with which I would now turn to Daniel, because I think there would be so many more things to say about that. But to Daniel, so indeed, you're representing industry stakeholders. So Hydrogen Europe has really a very wide membership with all players across the hydrogen value chains. And for you, which are the key success factors for electrolyzers to play their role in the energy system?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be discussing this topic here. Indeed, we represent over 620 companies in the whole value chain of hydrogen sector, from technology providers to producers, consumers, companies distributing, transmitting the hydrogen and different molecules. I think we need to move a bit the mindset from system for flexibility requirements to flexibility incentives. And I think also the presentation alluded to this, saying, well, if the electrolyzers are not going to be flexible, then we've got a problem, we have additional costs, then we have to invest in new technologies, so they've got to be flexible. And I think this mindset, it's a little bit difficult to digest, yeah? Why I will say that? Because you could apply it to a different player in the market. You could say, well, the wind and solar are very variable. And if they don't behave, if they don't dispatch themselves, then we have to integrate all these things with other technologies. So why don't we put batteries to all the solar parks and all the wind parks, right? And we don't do that. So I think it's very important. Again, it's not hydrogen related, it's really system integration. And if you look at the wind sector, for instance, where I've been working for many years, there's been a discussion about grid forming capabilities, because the system will need more and more inertia. So let's force all the wind parks to include these capabilities. It's a huge overcost. What basically is happening now, and you have a good example in the UK and also in Ireland, is that the system has said, well, instead of forcing everyone to have that capability, let's look at how much of this capability we need in the system. Let's measure it, let's put a price on it, and let's procure it from the market. And then you have a lot of interesting technological solutions coming in, synchronous condenser, flywheels, whatever it is, which is working to provide that capability. You don't force all the wind farms, all the solar parks to have a battery on site. I think this is very relevant for hydrogen because until now, for these last 5 years since the strategy, we've been trying to impose that this flexibility is from the beginning on all the electrolyzers. And this is very hard, especially if you don't have an infrastructure. Because today all the electrolyzers are being put on the consumer side, and the consumer side is a refinery, it's a chemical plant. And what they are doing is they are substituting their gray hydrogen, which is very stable. And they say, well, now I want green hydrogen, but I want it in the same form. It's more expensive, okay, pay more. But at least give it to me in the same quality, same supply, same performance. Otherwise, what I'm getting is not as good as what I had. And now we are saying, but you have to be flexible. It does not work like that. I think, indeed, electrolyzers will follow market signals to a certain extent, so as much as they can. They will not produce with the prices are very high, because anyway, they have to sign a PPA long term, they have a price. If the market prices are much higher, they will stop producing, they will sell that power in the market. So they will follow the market in any case, but not all the time, and not when, for instance, the requirement, which are in a specific legislation and delegated act, tells them to do so. So I think this is where we need to change the mindset to go from requirements into incentives. And then if you look into incentives, you can think, well, let electrolyzers participate on the non-fossil flexibility mechanisms, which are being developed at the moment. Let electrolyzers participate on capacity markets. So all that it's very important that they have the capability to participate. And then, okay, we look into the future and we say, okay, we are going to have electrolyzers providing flexibility. Well, we need, I think, 2 things for that. We need the capacity to store that excess hydrogen, so we will need storage, which we don't have in large scale. And the second, we will need to have the possibility to place electrolyzer where it makes more sense. Today, we put the electrolyzer where it is consumption. We needed a hydrogen pipeline for our hydrogen infrastructure. Otherwise, it's just only hypothetical, the whole thing, yeah? And here, I think what we need to do as a community, I think we need to agree that the long term is a system which is coupled, where you have several infrastructures working with each other, as you were showing before. Because if we, each time, at each step of the process, we question the whole fundamental of how much hydrogen, how much infrastructure and so on, we don't advance at the speed that we need. And Sheila, I think your report of Acer, when it was presented last year, the Hydrogen Week, I remember it was said, yeah, we need to build hydrogen infrastructure, but we need to be prudent. And I will say, well, I wouldn't be that prudent. Maybe you react later, but if we need to be bold, we need to anticipate investments. The Commission is doing anticipatory investments recommendations also for infrastructure, right? So I think we need to move faster. If we don't have the infrastructure, we will have no possibility to have that flexibility at the scale which is being presented. No matter how much you ask them to do it, you will just basically kill all the business case, yeah? Yeah, I'll leave it there for the moment, thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And I think I will collect consensus points on things that we could agree. And I think there was one common point that you all three seem to have made is that we need all the elements in place for true system integration to happen. So you need the hydrogen infrastructure, you need the price signals, you need the proper market organization, and you need really also the storages to be in place for this system integration to happen, because modeling, of course, can point you to the most optimized outcome. But of course, for that most optimized outcome, there need to be all the conditions in place for that to happen in reality. And the other take from Lanya's intervention that I heard also between the lines is the right incentives. So we need to align the incentives for everyone in the market in order to go into the same direction. Very, very good. So now I would give the word to Javier, who can bring us a bit the system perspective from the electricity system point of view. And of course, transmission system operators are key actors in the flexibility management. So how do you see the role of electrolysers and hydrogen in the overall system from your perspective?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us, of course. So the opportunity to give our view on this topic and also get insight from main actors of hydrogen, and power to hydrogen. We have been looking into it from EUSEW since a long time ago. We have done some studies that we have already published, and new studies coming soon. And yeah, we see hydrogen as a promising source of flexibility. We think it can provide both, and we have seen in some of the slides from Fabian that it is a flexible technology, so it should be able to provide flexibility in a proactively manner, so to say, as we call it, explicit flexibility. So actively participating in balancing markets and congestion management markets, on top of course, as you said, Daniel, following price signals of wholesale electricity market. So yeah, we are really looking forward to it. And yeah, in the very last study that we just finished and we will publish soon, we're more focused on green hydrogen. We see more or less, I'm happy to see that you are saying the same. So it seems we are correct on that. Yeah. We are still in a ramp-up phase, so to say, where this flexibility, it will take time to see it from hydrogen. There are aspects needed as a storage, as a transport network for hydrogen that will provide the needed tools on top of the needed incentives, maybe. For electrolysers to not only follow the price signals of electricity needed for producing hydrogen, but also actively participating in balancing markets to contribute to system needs. And yeah, also in that study, we also see that there is an opportunity also on coordinating between EUSEW, ENSOG, NO, on the planning on the network and so on, which is already ongoing. And we think that once all that is in place, and it is also linked, I think all this is also linked to the point you made about CapEx. We also see that as long as the CapEx continue to be high, the economic incentive, so to say, to have a flexible behavior will take time to come. But when all this is in place, we really think that hydrogen can be a very important actor in providing the flexibility needs that we know, as you all have already mentioned, that we already have, and that this need will increasingly be present for all the TSOs in Europe, as long as the transition objectives and integration of renewables and the deployment of renewables advance. So, on and all, yeah. Really looking forward for hydrogen to be actively participating in the balancing markets and congestion management, and yeah, of course, some evolutions from regulatory perspective and market design, of course, may be needed to make sure that the correct incentives for being flexible proactively, I mean, not only implicitly, are in place. Yeah. So that would be it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so the consensus point I take from here is the ramp-up phase. So we are not yet in 2040 or 2050. We're in 2025. And we have in place what we have in place, which in terms of infrastructure, at least from a hydrogen perspective, not not yet much. We have to be honest about it. So we need to take a particular care of this ramp-up phase, how to use this ramp-up phase to go into the direction in which we want to go. And this is where our long-term vision comes in. But how to then set the right incentives for this ramp-up phase to happen correctly and pointing to the right direction. So, and then I think you already hinted to some questions on business case and how we'll make it all happen also from a financial point of view. And I think we will come back later on this to the panel. But I would like to now go to Christian, who can bring maybe some hands-on perspective on this, because your company is really testing very, very strong flexibility solutions. So what's your point of view, Christian? And maybe a couple of words on your company as well.
So does it work? Yeah. So first I would say I come from a company called EUSEW, and EUSEW is a company that has been supplying design and equipment and catalysts for the petrochemical industry for 85 years. So we basically come from the chemical industry, but we have, over the last couple of decades, we have developed also electrolyzer technology for the day when we have to substitute the front ends of our chemical plants that are typically based on coal and gas with electricity. A lot of the feedback that I get, that is feedback that I get from those companies that are trying to develop projects, PTX projects. That means projects where they come with electricity, a PPA, and they want to produce a chemical, typically ammonia or methanol. And today we have heard a lot about the flexibility that is required from electrolysers to follow the profile of wind and solar. And what I can say is that I haven't seen a power profile that our ammonia and combined ammonia and electrolysis technology hasn't been able to follow. So that is not really a problem. The main problem is that if you have if there is a lot of variation in the electricity availability, then it hurts on the project's cost, because these projects, they are very, very expensive. And if our customers, they see that they are building a very expensive plant, but they cannot operate it due to the lack of electricity, then it's not profitable. And the chemicals that we are producing here, methanol and ammonia, that is commodities. Commodities that are today in large degree produced in Russia and in the Middle East, and then it's shipped to Europe. And going forward, I think that these projects, they will also be located places where the electricity is available most of the time. Because again, it is just a commodity, and to ship it from, say, Argentina to Europe is not very expensive. So the projects, they will be located where the electricity is available. Then I can say that there are also a lot of other alternatives. We talk a lot about methanol and ammonia, whether these technologies are flexible. They are. There are also other technologies such as synthetic gasoline. That's something that is made today from natural gas. From natural gas and coal, but it can easily also be made from electricity and CO2. So again, the projects, they are going to be located where the CO2 is available at a reasonable cost. Some places the cost goes up because there are incentives to do sequestration, and again, where the electricity price is low and reasonable.
Thank you very much, Christian. And I'm coming back to our consensus points, by which I might echo, like an old real estate broker, location, location, location. So it's basically for the system integration to really happen with success and to also satisfy the business case. The very first topic that seems to come to mind is location, location, location. So really you need to find those locations within Europe, especially where the right conditions come together for these technologies to operate under optimal conditions. So I think I take that as a next on the consensus list. But with this, I turn to Charlotte, who may be easing a bit the location question by providing some additional buffers, so the storage for hydrogen.
Thank you very much, Kitty, and very happy to be with you today. Indeed, I think we were all looking forward for this panel. So location, yes, indeed, a key question. And maybe if you allow me, I will take just a step back because you were mentioning sectoral integration as an input for our thoughts. What we are working at in the EU currently is to decarbonize our energy mix. We want and we do have more and more renewable energy sources in the energy mix, but notably the power mix. And then comes the question of flexibility for electrolysers. I heard many things on hydrogen. I've just taken over a new hat, if I may say so, focusing on hydrogen, all businesses for the ENGIE group, so still working in Storengy. And I know we came from a moment where there was a lot of enthusiasm. And because it takes some time to ramp up, in a way, we are just ramping up the ambition so far, then there is a form of disappointment and, well, should we go still for hydrogen? So my first message is, yes, we need to go for hydrogen. This molecule is key to decarbonize overall the energy mix and to support more and more renewable in the energy mix. So that's one. Second, we were speaking about electrolysers, flexibility. And there again, I think there is a sort of learning curve, if you allow me this expression. We saw many players coming in the market and some are not there anymore. And some are still there, and they are very robust, and we need to work with them. And whatever the technology, PEM, alkaline, the question of flexibility is indeed key. But then it needs to be supported, obviously, by the adequate regulatory framework, by sound business models, but also by infrastructure. And indeed, storage is a key element to support electrolyzer. When you have electrolyzers making the best use of renewable energy power, because I mean, the point is that it is curtailed currently. So it's not as if we didn't develop renewable energy. We did it. So, and we need to go further from my perspective. But there are moments where we have to curtail massively. And this is lost. So we must not lose this energy. So we need to convert in hydrogen to store. And that's why I'm approaching both together, because it makes fully sense. And then it can come back to typically end users, smoothing some industrial processes. So it's interesting to see that some may not need that, but some clearly are asking us to have like a flat supply of hydrogen. So that happens. There is a business case for that. The question is, what is the willingness to pay? But we'll go to that point later on. But we are there. So electrolysers jointly with storage, you have this flexibility. You make the best use of renewable energy sources, and I think that's a very important element. And you are still providing a solution to end users. So now to give you a view when I'm speaking about underground hydrogen storage, so I'm speaking about huge infrastructure underground. And generally speaking, people tend to, and thank you, because actually that was not what was done during your study, but there is a view that it's very heavy, seasonal, not very flexible. What we are contemplating is storing hydrogen in salt cavern. So it's still massive volume, but it's very reactive storage, meaning that you can do like, meeting demand on a sort of mid to long term, if I may say so. But you can also come within day with some, many variation, and then supporting the demand. So that's an important point to bear in mind. And jointly with Artelis and Frontier Economics, we assessed what would be needed should we want to reach Repower EU, which is a good direction, in terms of underground hydrogen storage. So it was 45 terawatt hours coming from a base of project of like 10 terawatt hours. So we have a massive gap. The point is not to say we need to fulfill that by 2030, because the timeline was 2030. But just to say we have this gap to fulfill. How do we do that? And then second question, why do we do it? We do it because when we have this whole assessment, we observed that we were reducing emission from the power system by 10%. That we were reducing curtailment for renewable energy sources by 50%. So that's why really we are going, I mean, with this sectoral integration, which might be odd for you, I'm a gas player at the end of the day, but it's a question of molecule, as you rightly pointed out, Kitty, so the alliance between molecule, electron, and that's how we can make it happen, the energy transition, so electrolysers plus storage, location indeed, and then minimizing the cost because some of those storages already exist and they can be repurposed.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And I think by now we all pointed to the business case, so that's my next consensus point. So the way we understand, it's not so much about the technology. The technology is there, and it has developed into a direction that will match the future technological needs. So it's much more about how do we create a framework that will remunerate those technologies for offering the services that they do. And I think what we also took from Fabien's presentation, but from many of your comments as well, that okay, probably we are out of a baseload logic. We are in a logic where we cannot assume 100% load factors, neither for the electrolyzers nor for the generation that might give it back to the system. So we are moving into logic, okay, the load factor will not be base load. But then how do we create the right conditions for this business case to be sustained by the market? Because ultimately, of course, subsidies, support, they can play a role in an initial phase, but when we are to 2050, we need to build a model that can sustain itself. So my question would be, how do you see what would be, when we are in the long-term logic, how can this business model be sustained? So I don't know who would like to take the first question, but what kind of system services can be remunerated so that electrolyzers can sustain themselves in the longer run? What's the trick? What are the conditions for this business case to happen and to be sustainable in the longer term? Daniel, I think you would like to start. You were reaching for the microphone.
Just waiting for while the others still think about what to say. Just to warm up. So I think you explained it very well, and I think sometimes this gets mixed up in the conversation. The long term, where we would like to be and what the rules should be, and until we get there, and we heard the ramp-up phase a few times. So I think we need to differentiate that. If we don't, we're just talking hypothetically, because there will be no electrolyzers to support anything what we are just discussing. So we need to look at, cuddling a little bit those first projects, try to reduce the capex significantly so that we are in a better situation later so that they can participate. And then when we are there, I think what they are, maybe at least what I can think of now is first on the cost side, we need to reduce the costs. Today, electricity is around 60 to 80% of the overall cost of the molecule that you produce, of hydrogen molecule. Depends on which market you are and so on. So it's all about the electricity price at the end of the... And CapEx has been highlighted. Of course, CapEx is very important, especially if you go into the multi-billion size. There's a lot of risk there, but the electricity price is key. And when you can observe also at home is that more and more your fixed part of your electricity price is just fixed, and it's the network charges and it's the taxes. I was trying to evaluate my house contracts. I have electric heating. Yesterday I was doing that, and 60% of the cost is anyways fixed. So if I go to variable tariff or fixed tariff that they offer me, the risk is very small because I continue to pay a huge part. And this happens the same for large industrial consumers. That happens for electrolyzers. So I'm not saying that electrolyzers should not pay grid connection if they are, or grid tariffs if they are making use of the grid like any other one, so you should be paying for it. But there are a number of elements on that tariff, like for instance, charges for ancillary services, or charges for supporting renewables, or some other type of levies that we shouldn't be exposed to, because in principle we are going to be helping the renewable integration, and in principle we are going to be helping system balancing. So I think we need to get rid of those extra costs that make the whole business case difficult. And then I think I mentioned it before, I think it will be very, very important to enable electrolyzers to participate in balancing markets in different, I think there are different products for that. You could, first of all, frequency containment reserve of the very short time frame, they should be able to provide that. Grid connection codes are being revised at the moment to include also power to hydrogen generation, some other new loads. So that should be there. Then, secondary frequency response could also be potentially there. I think technology-wise has been said. I think we can provide. It will be a question about, well, is the price sufficiently high for anyone to modulate, and to provide that. But I think at the end of the day, I think short-term variability, we will be competing with batteries. And I think that's overall, for price arbitration within the day, it's going to be difficult, I think maybe when we have all this very, very good storage, it's better. But I think also the longer-term adequacy, so we need there to be part of this non-fossil flexibility market. We don't know how they look like, so I cannot say much on the pricing, right? But also on capacity markets. Those ones we know a lot better, and I think there we can play a very important role, both increasing capacity when it's possible and decreasing it, or consumption. So.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think Chila and probably Javier will want to react on the tariff ones, but I understand Charlotte would like to take the floor before. Yeah, sure.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to react because I think so I would be very humble just to start with and make everyone comfortable. I'm working in the industry. I'm not a policy maker, so obviously what I will share is just views on how we could approach things. But listening to Daniel, definitely I think there is another topic that we need to bear in mind for hydrogen. I was speaking in a way of power to gas a bit earlier, and how at the end of the day we guarantee that the molecule of hydrogen used, for instance, by industrial end user is really green, if I may say so. But then there is this question of how do we give back potentially to the power system? And I know that this whole chain might be challenged in terms of efficiency. I'm not saying this should be the reference, but I'm just saying that this is something we may have to use very wisely when it's needed, but just to bear it in mind. And when would that be the case? In a way, you pointed out to that earlier, Kitty, with that, it's true, we all learn this term, Dunkelflaute. But at the end of the day, you have 2-3 weeks without wind, very cold. You may need that. So the frequency or the when it would be needed, that I'm not too sure. But that's definitely something we need to have in mind, and where we would need really long-term planning that we as companies are not really able. We can provide some insights, but that's just for us a very beginning. Second point I wanted to mention, how can we contribute? So then I take my Storengy hat. So we launched in France the first survey among potential customers to understand, if they would be interested by underground hydrogen storage, what would it look like? We participate to a market assessment in Germany, so that was all German storage operators, and we are discussing with potential customer in the UK. So I don't have the answer yet, but the idea is that now we work with Artelis again, to understand what could be the services that we provide. So I'm more with the storage hat than the electrolyzer, but as you understand, it goes very well together from our perspective, what would be their willingness to pay. And then we want to understand what would be the missing gap, but adding everything. So some people are willing to pay. And we had this discussion, by the way, when we were preparing. Some people, and you mentioned it as well, are looking for green hydrogen. They are able to pay more, but the question, and Daniel, you pointed out to this as well, there is no green hydrogen that they could use. So really the point is, how do we sum all that up and just see what is the missing gap and how best to address it? So we're working on it, so that's more a teaser than an answer, but happy to share at a later stage, because I think we will have to have all these elements from this sectoral integration that you mentioned, more renewable, how we make the best use of it until the end user, and also potentially giving back on some occasions that are difficult to quantify right now, and we would do that very wisely. Again, I think it won't happen often, I hope, in a way, but to the electricity system as well.
I think this now calls on Javier, because you're doing the resource adequacy assessments, the flexibility assessments, many things that
Not
are relevant.
Not my name, because they are very polite, but yeah, they touch some topics. Yeah, first of all, maybe to to limit my intervention, the point on tariff, I will maybe skip because from TSO we can have a view, but we don't have competence on there. So okay, but it is true that there are some expectations and concerns on the tariffs globally, but also, I mean, there's this trilemma also because, I mean, there is investment cost needed and this needs to be recovered. So, yeah, interesting topic, but I will try not to enter into that. Regarding the non-fossil flexibility support schemes and capacity mechanisms that you already mentioned in your first intervention, and that drew my attention. Indeed, those are tools that normally, I guess, I mean, you should be allowed to get there. At least capacity mechanism, I don't find the issue as I see you more. I say you because I'm thinking of you about the hydrogen, sorry. But I see hydrogen nowadays as demand response, as you said, but indeed in the future it can also be providing re-electrification. And but that's something that it is maybe, it depends a lot on whether a country has an adequacy concern or not. So that, it brings again towards the location discussion. And what you have universal, so to say, in Europe, because we, as you may already know, we are very advanced in this creation of the internal electricity market, is the balancing markets and the congestion management markets, that you have them everywhere in Europe, and they are already pan-European. Not all the systems are connected yet, but most of them are or connected or very close to be connected, and that will bring you a huge market where you can not only satisfy the needs of the system where you are connected to, but the needs of the system of any system which is part of the internal electricity market. And indeed, it is true that it is not like the ahead market or the intraday market that any actor can make part of that market. You need to be entitled and you need to run some tests. But in theory, at least following our studies, most of the electrolysers technologies, they could provide all the services that you already mentioned. Also MFRR, which would be tertiary response in Spanish, there was something else. So non-fossil flexibility. The thing is that that's the methodology you were asking, Charlotte. So that's still under development. So there's not much that we can say on how it will look, because it is a recent deliverable that comes from the MDR, which entered into force only last year, and it is currently being developed jointly by TSOs and DSOs in this case. So also I don't have a clear view on how the assessment of these flexibility needs will look like. But it could also, from my view, but this is a first reaction, of course, it could also be a way of financing from my hydrogen, getting a flexibility contract, of course. And I'm not sure if I'm missing any of the questions, or I think it was exhaustive enough. Yeah? I
think this is perfect, because I think it gives a good view of what is upcoming. And I think if I make a point, possibly on behalf of Daniel, of course, for the business is necessary is to be able to calculate it, so that these revenues can be calculated, they can be put into a business plan for making that business plan happen. But Christian, maybe you have a view before giving over to Chila on if she wants to weigh in. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we as a company see is that our customers, they struggle with the offtake. So we see some projects, they are basically green steel projects. That means it's green carbon monoxide or green hydrogen that goes into steel production. And that market is driven by the European car industry, because there are requirements from the EU that says that the CO2 footprint of a car needs to go down. That drives projects in Sweden, it drives projects in the Middle East. If we want to have projects, for instance, on e-methanol or other chemicals, then we need to create the market in the same way. So, for instance, today we have ethanol in our gasoline. That's not something that somebody has found out. It's a good idea from an economical point of view. That's a requirement. That's why we have biological particles, a molecule in the gasoline. And I think we need to do something like that with e-products as well, because they will never be able to compete with chemical plants in the Middle East, where the feedstock, namely natural gas, is basically for free. It's for free, and electricity is not for free. So if we want to have the green molecule in our society, then we need to create the market. And that is also what we see is most important for those financing the projects. They want to see a PPA on the electricity, and then they want to see an off-take agreement on the product. And if one of these two are missing, then the financiers, they will say, oh, very interesting, but at a later point maybe. So I think creating the market by putting requirements to different chemicals or fuels and so on, that is what is required.
Thank you very much. So indeed, of course, let's not forget about the main product, that is the hydrogen and the derivatives in this business, where, of course, a large part of the revenue needs to come, but also to look into the opportunities that can come from the system services, but that need to be designed in a way so that operators can factor them into their business plan as additional revenues. Gila, would you like to come in on any of this?
I have small comments. I'm myself not an electricity expert, but so the small comments would go like this. I'm also going very humble, as Charlotte was saying. So it's we are watching a little bit what the countries are doing, because I think for hydrogen, green hydrogen, I mean, you have to also see what is invented nationally. So in Germany, I see that for example, that so we will look at it. There won't be levies, for example. So there will be some action on the taxation elements. And I think in France there are some thoughts, and also in Italy. So that's a very important element. Then what we see as well is how you can participate in the market, and that has been also discussed from the very beginning. You know, flexibility, incentives, what is going on, what you could be doing. I think that should be more visible, probably more standardized, probably going more across the EU. And then, of course, that raises a couple of questions, whether we can do it and how. The UK has a very interesting system, because there are some sort of competing solutions. So you have to compete for a solution. So if there's a flexibility for a system looks for a flexibility option, then there is a question to the market who can provide it at the lowest price. And I think that could help eventually electrolysers if they are very flexible. I think that would be definitely an opportunity that we should be looking at, and then how we would be creating that at the EU level. I think that's also very exciting, because we should not be forgetting that we have many jurisdictions, many regulatory systems, and sometimes companies have challenges to go across. So a system works here in France that maybe will not work in the same way in Germany. And so the cross-border element, the coordination element, which is also at the national level, but also across the EU, I think we would need to work on it. And our companies eventually are starting to have simpler solutions there. I would stop here.
I think we still have 1 minute before going into the question and answer session. So I think you can already reflect on your questions, which I understand will be submitted via Slido, but we will also have a microphone to circulate. But so while you're preparing your questions for the question and answer sessions, I would give the word to Fabian, whether you have found some food for thought for further studies, or whether you would like to come in on any of these topics.
Yeah, there's always more to do, definitely. And just to maybe say a few words about your remarks, which I mostly agree with, that I mentioned this volume question of the hydrogen, that the flexibility becomes more important the more you have of it. And so I would view it in this way, that for the first units of electrolyzers to come into the market, it's not really necessary to put that as a requirement of the electrolyzers, but that's something that you need to think of when you have a lot of them in the system. And maybe it's wise to plan ahead and think about how you want to do that in the future, but it's maybe not as important for the ramp up. And Also, your remark on the network tariffs that dampen the electricity price signals. I mean, the economic incentive to run the electrolyzers flexibly is not something that we put into the model and say the electrolyzer has to run flexibly. It's an economic outcome because it lives off the lower electricity prices. But anything that dampens these price volatilities from the wholesale market, that of course counteracts this incentive to run when the electricity prices are low. So I think I think there's some common ground on the outlook of the electrolyzers in the system.
Very much, and I'm always wondering also about the opportunity cost of not running, which is not just the cost of turning it off, but also not producing your product, not selling the methanol and the ammonia that you were supposed to sell. So I think the economic equation is a bit more complex than just whether you run or not run. So I think it is a very, very interesting topic for further research to see what is really the true optimization. But we have already a first question, so if we can give the microphone and please present yourself.
Brad Ladwig from the University of Luxembourg. I'm coordinator of a Hydrogen Valley project. So one of these ramp-up phase 5 megawatt electrolyser should be producing in first quarter of 27. A few comments for all of you. The first one is the bankability of these projects. You know, we have to show a PPA for 10 years. At what price, from whom we will procure the electricity to run the electrolyser. So that price is locked in. It doesn't matter what fluctuating prices or even free electricity is available on the grid for the next 10 years. These are use as produced PPAs. We must use that electricity as it's produced. So our ability to tap into other sources of very competitively or even, you know, balance the grid and access free, be paid to take electricity from the grid is nearly nil. The second one is to have a bankable project, you need a lot of full load hours. You know, you can't oversize an electrolyzer, which is the single highest cost CapEx component for the plant, so that in the future you have the flexibility to tap into these, provide market services or all of these things, because it's horrendously expensive. You have to size it very, very carefully. Another big cost item is short-term storage. So again, we can't tap in and make a lot of extra hydrogen when prices for electricity are very low, because we have to get it to our off-takers when they need it. They're not interested in when we made it. They need it when they need it for their factories, when they need it for their buses. And if we want to say, well, we oversize short-term storage for a couple of days, that's a massive extra CapEx component that we can't justify up front. So in this ramp-up phase, the one biggest thing that would help us is actually a regulatory burden, which is the temporal matching that we have to observe after this cutover date from monthly to hourly temporal matching. So we have to size our electrolyzer now so that we can operate in that regime. We won't operate in that regime to begin with, but we will have to, if we stick with this RFNBO RED II directive as it stands at the moment. And that adds a couple of euros per kilogram of hydrogen produced for the next 10 years because of one rule, one piece of text. There's no physical reality to that, it's just text. So if we could lobby for something that would make our project easier to deliver, able to, you know, more generously size the CapEx components so that we can participate in grid services in the future, we would say relax that. You know, don't ram it onto us from monthly to hourly, from one day to the next, because it makes these projects much, much harder to deliver. But no one mentioned that. And the other thing that I say is these things on green hydrogen or other colours of hydrogen, no one cares about colours. It's RFNBO or it's not RFNBO. We can't sell hydrogen that's not RFNBO. There's no market for it. I don't know, maybe you know of markets for it, but we have no market for any hydrogen that we produce that we can't get certified as RFNBO.
Thank you very much. So maybe just a quick reaction on our side. I think that's the moment where we have to clarify it's happening on that front, is that we have launched a study in order to look into the exact criteria of our delegated act, in order to fully and thoroughly understand exactly the aspects that you have been just mentioning now. And if I make a little publicity for our consultants, so that you can please also relay those. I mean, if you have any technical data that you can share with them, so that this study can be as comprehensive, as objective, as as possible so that we can take the right conclusions from that. So sorry, there was a moment of publicity for us to really get these comments to our consultant who is performing this study for us. But I see that Nania wanted to react.
Well, of course I agree, but that was the first point I made. Just I didn't call it by their name, but I said we need to change the mindset from requirements into incentives. And exactly that requirement, which basically force you to follow the profile of the wind farm or solar park with whom you have the PPA. And that's it. You might be flexible, you might be operating in a way which is system friendly, but you might be actually doing exactly the opposite because you just need to follow the profile of your electricity, which might not be aligned with the profile of what the TSO or the CDSO needs in that time. So I fully agree with that. Yeah.
We have also another question on this. Does the panel see a different, well, not on this, another question coming from through Slido, which I will take. Does the panel see a difference in the role of small and large electrolyzers, I guess that is, so larger than 500 megawatts in their interaction with the electricity system? I don't know if Javier would like to take this.
Yeah, more than the role, maybe the impact, right? I mean,
yes.
The bigger you are, the greater possibilities you have of providing services to the system, of course. But how to say? So in the balancing markets, at least, of course, the bigger the better. But the smaller ones, they can also contribute because all the offers, all the bids, they are all together matched against the system needs, and they add. So I mean. I would say no. So there is no difference in the size of the facility and their role towards the electricity system. Yeah.
Thank you very much, because I also understand that the minimum bid sizes to bid into the markets are very low. So
yeah, no, it's I don't like saying figures because they are very volatile in my mind, but way smaller than 100 megawatts. Yeah.
I don't know if Christian would like to come in on this question still as well. Because you're running big electrolyzers.
Yeah, so we are not running big electrolyzers right now, but we are hoping to do that, and we have built a factory to produce them, so that's possible. No, electrolyzers, they can be operated at low and high capacity. They are never really switch off. It's like putting a car into neutral. That is what we do with electrolyzers when we sort of switch them off. It means that they still have a very small consumption. But again, they can run up and down as quickly as the electricity can be produced and taken away. And I think some electrolyzer technologies they will have problems operating at part loads. But the way these electrolyzer plants are built, then you do not have one big electrolyzer. You have a lot of smaller units, and then you can run them on-off and thereby, or on-off and maybe in a small capacity band, and thereby you can basically make any capacity in the range. So I think it's kind of a myth that electrolyzers they are not flexible enough.
Thank you very much, Christian. And you already answered to the next question that we have seen. So any other questions from the audience? We still have 11 minutes, so feel free.
A question on lead markets. So sustainable aviation fuel is a classic one, right? So there's a biological component, there's an e-fuel component of that, and it's fixed for many years in the future. And so in some parts of Europe, especially in the north, there's a lot of investment going into trying to build up these plants. So we've got, the old petrol biodiesel, we've got the sustainable aviation fuel. What should be the next lead market that would help drive hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, RFNBO hydrogen?
That's an excellent question. So we are working a lot on the steel. We are also, and that's something that the Commission has already identified as one of the lead markets. Also chemicals have been identified. I think it's also very important. And fertilizers. think these are sectors where we see, I think there is also some potential for refineries and the transport sector. Yeah? So all those are important lead markets, and the idea is basically to create a clear, harmonized labeling system which allows you to differentiate between the different carbon footprints, and which also give you clear information about which of those will drive, let's say, investment for green molecule, yeah, out of your full palette of carbon intensities. So that's one thing, to bring it into the market, to have information for the end consumer. And then you need to work on incentives at the downstream part of things, or even obligations. You could look it into public procurement. There is already public procurement of, let's say, buses and coaches in cities, or public procurement for construction sites, where you could mandate the use of a specific product that you would like to see. Also in the food and beverage industry, there is a lot of public procurement for food and drinks, hospital, for the army, for the schools. And there is already conditions about it has to be organic, it has to be local, it has to be many things. But they don't talk about the carbon intensity of those products. And so here we could also tap into a market which will demand green fertilizers, and that will send a signal for green ammonia production, for instance. So there is a lot to do. We're coming with a paper very soon which will explain all these concepts, and I hope the Commission is also picking it up, because they're coming with this Acceleration Act very soon. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for taking this question. And indeed, of course, we have the Clean Industrial Deal and this concept of developing lead markets. I mean, just to mention that, of course, there are already a couple of targets out there for specifically for hydrogens, specifically for RFNBOs, but also for some non-fossil hydrogen, low-carbon hydrogen solutions. I mean, the Refuel Aviation proposal, FuelEU Maritime proposal, besides, of course, the Renewable Energy Directive, they're all pieces of legislation that provide some pull factors to pull this hydrogen, these clean forms of hydrogen into the market, into those sectors which will definitely need those molecules for their long-term decarbonization. And of course, it's very important that those targets are really implemented by the industry players, but also by member states, where these targets need to be transposed. So of course, this is a very important aspect of it, which of course will come back also to the offtake and provide the incentives, if not obligations, for the offtakers for that to happen. But as Daniel said, of course, lead markets can be much broader than what we have targets for today. So there's definitely more work to come on that front. Yes, please, we have a question back there.
Yes, hi, my name is Sönke from ThyssenKrupp Nucera. We are a manufacturer of electrolyzers. Daniel, I understood yesterday from a conversation in the association that the upcoming decarbonization bank, the pilot auction, would be limited to electrification options. Maybe you could confirm whether or not that is the case, and then explain why that should be done, because there are options outside of electrification, and I'd be very surprised. I'm wondering why one should take that step.
Happy to take the question, but I mean, it's a Commission initiative, right? So the Commission will say a clarification. Well, basically, I think the colleagues from DG Klima, they are running an auction in Industrial Decarbonization Bank, a pilot one, end of this year, and there was a consultation already run a couple of months ago. There was a consultation, stakeholders workshop, and basically they explained that they have decided that this first auction, which is, by the way, for off-taker, which I think is a very good move, yeah, that we've been asking for this. It will be to decarbonize heating, the heat sector, which I think is also a very legitimate choice. But then within that auction design, it will be only electrification projects will be eligible to participate in that auction, because anyways, hydrogen is already enjoying the hydrogen bank auction. So if you're hydrogen, go to the hydrogen bank. If you want to electrify heat, then you have to be electrification. If you have to decarbonize heat, you have to be electrical. And that's, at the moment, what is being proposed or what is being discussed. I don't think there is a final proposal on the table. From our perspective, I think this is it's a mistake, because it should be particularly if you're going to have an auction which people will bid based on the cost to decarbonize the CO2 tons. How much money do you need to reduce emissions? One who asks for less money gets the support, right? Whether it will be hydrogen or electricity or biomethane or whatever, that's for the market to decide. I'm not sure that hydrogen will win. That's not the point, but it should not be precluded from participating, which, going back to our discussion, it shouldn't be precluded from participating on flexibility markets if they were to be put forward. So that is more the principle rather than what will happen.
I have also a comment. Yeah. Okay, so I have a comment also concerning the financing, and I think that is an issue that is also coming to us. We were running a public consultation on the intertemporal cost allocation, and of course that relates also about how the money would be shared between future users. So today, to make the infrastructure today cheaper, but. Related to it, we were having some pointers that there would be a need for more sort of adequate EU funding, because nationally you have different opportunities. There are some countries which are more capable to support certain projects, and there are countries which are less so. But at the same time, we would like to have something which is relatively unified, depending, of course, what are the use cases. So there, I think the funding element is an issue. I know that I also understand that maybe there is not so much for such a vast kind of transition to provide enough funding. But certainly there is a need to put together minds, how we could create some sort of similar approaches, more integrated approaches, also in terms of funding, and that goes across the whole system.
Thank you very much to the panelists, because I think just on the funding question, I mean, all these comments are coming at a very crucial moment when the Commission is preparing its proposal for the next MFF. So I think these considerations are very, very important right now. I mean, we still have, of course, the current MFF, which has some limited funding when it comes to infrastructure under the Connecting Europe facility. And of course, the Industrial Decarbonisation Bank that is being set up. And I agree with Daniel that, of course, the discussions are ongoing. And of course, they're not finalized yet, but our colleagues in DG Klima are really very intensively working on it. And by the way, then I make a bit of publicity for another session that will just happen. I think at 2 o'clock it starts about the hydrogen bank, but also the hydrogen mechanism for ramping up the hydrogen market, which will be, I think, the financing session where you can where such discussions can also take place, and all these considerations can be made, and Klima colleagues will be there, so you can also ask them exactly the same questions. But in the end, just maybe one consideration that, of course, I mean, we sometimes have this feeling that, of course, we see all the needs and we want to fill all the needs. And it's very difficult, of course, when you're designing such new instruments. When we did also the first auctions of the European Hydrogen Bank, you need to start with some simplicity in order to be able to run such auctions. And then with every round you learn, and with every round you can add on more and more features, more and more openings, so that for also from a simple management point of view, that it becomes absolutely feasible, and that really we can also draw some lessons, because for us these auctions, especially also the ones on the Hydrogen Bank, they were also important from a market discovery, price discovery, understanding point of view. So of course the more complexity you can add at a later stage, but the simpler you start, the more conclusions you can draw, because you kind of, as in research, you isolate the factors that are influencing certain outcomes, and then you can learn more and more from this process. So I think we are just reaching the end of our session, because we only have 1.5 minutes left. So if anyone would like to make a final statement before we conclude. Yeah? Daniel, please.
I'd like to reflect on what Sheila said before. Very good, because basically you said, well, the flexibility should be provided by the ones who can provide that flexibility at the lower cost. And I think we need to work on that spirit, yeah? And I reiterate my comments from the beginning. Exactly, we need to think on who will provide that flexibility, and we don't have to impose those requirements on the different market players. So that's one thing. The other one is we talk about sector integration, and very good as a long-term perspective, but for electricity sector and hydrogen sector to be coupled, to be integrated, I think what we need to decouple is the production and the consumption of hydrogen. So we need to decouple that. So we need the infrastructure, we need the storage, and we need that. If we're not able to decouple it, we don't have that flexibility to the level that we would like to see, like from this modeling. And this is super important. Today we have projects which are producing ammonia. They are putting it into a train, 250 kilometers to bring it to the delivery. That's not system optimization. And that's because they have to fulfill the requirements, and because we don't have infrastructure. So we need to change that. And then I think it's also about the time, the phase. So we need a trajectory until we get to the point that we want to get. In the trajectory, we need to allow business cases to emerge. You need to facilitate grid exemptions. You mentioned, I think, in France and Germany. Yes, at least until the infrastructure is there. We should, and if we want to put dynamic pricing, maybe it's a good idea, but not today. Because if you put dynamic pricing into electrolyzer, you just kill them. Because they don't have the ability to play flexibly. You just kill them. So we need to see that in the long term. So I think it's very important, this ramp-up concept that has emerged here. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I think we're just concluding our session today. And I take from this discussion that first of all, we all in a way confirm the vision that sector integration is super important, that both sectors can benefit from this integration, but for this integration to happen, we need to get there. So it is very important to have this shared long-term vision, because it means that we are all going and advancing into the same direction. But in order to be really making the steps that are required for this vision to materialize, we will need all the elements in place. We will need infrastructures, we will need initial financing, we will need lead markets, and we will need probably many more things to be put in place for this to happen. But I think it's already good that we are going into the same direction, that we share the same vision, because if we share the vision, that I'm sure that we can elaborate, work out this pathway for the future, for getting there. And I would like to, with this, thank you all for being here today and for contributing to this super, super interesting discussion. Thank you.